Faith is a lifestyle. It is the mountain on which you stand that makes you believe that a dream is actually attainable. It is the concrete evidence that makes the logically impossible seem completely tangible. It seemed hopeless, but faith. I can't prove it, but faith. I can't explain it, but my faith has given me peace.
I'm a Christian with $100 million vision. Can nobody box me and say that's a contradiction? Goal driven, God just blessed me with ambition. Look up when there is the definition.
King.
Royalty, stand up, brand up, fam up, hand out, no way, hands up, know what, name that, it's mine, claim that, it's time, message, we shine, above all, the decline, the darkness cannot last, the shadow of my past, before I gain knowledge of heritage, I have the bloodline that I share, most powerful out here, the mover of mountains is who I am touting, the richest among us is who I'm the son of, from sundown to sun up, that's how I then come up, position is just mine, the favor in due time, can't have it, man, you lying, the powerless, you trying, enemy beneath me, there's nothing to teach me, the people receive me, cause my God complete me, and my God does keep me, and my God that free me, and my God redeem me, and my God redeem me, king is the million, crown me, I am winning my position, God's giving, God's in it, God's shooting.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff, and I am here. I'm definitely thankful today because I have a special guest here on the line with me. Dr. James Love is here, and it's going to be, I just have a feeling this conversation is going to be amazing. Dr. James Love, just in case you don't know him, he's written 5 books. He's a pastor at one point, and he's a philosopher. I'm going to let him tell everything about him because he has a whole bunch of different hats. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fine, brother. How are you doing?
I am doing amazing, considering.
I assume you're safe and well.
Say it again.
I assume you're safe and well.
I am safe in the house where I have been for the last 2 months.
Doing the same thing.
Tell us. I want to first talk about you a little bit because I know there's a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things going on in the world, a lot of things going on just in our culture, and there's a lot of things to talk about just in general. I want to start, however, talking about you, who you are, where you're from. Now, I've known you for what feels like my entire life, and I can. If there's one thing I can think about, having visited you when I was younger, the one thing that always rings in my mind is I was always in awe at the amount, which is funny because of your background, at the amount of books that you had. And and it was just like books. And I remember asking you as a kid, like, have you actually read all these? And you're like, 85% of them. Like, Jesus.
Wow.
But tell me, let's tell the audience a little bit about you and just where you come from and how you got to where you are at this point in life.
I'd be delighted to. First of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I want to thank you for the platform that you have and the wonderful job that you are doing. I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you,
In
sir.
terms of me, as you said, I've been in the pastorate, still am in the pastorate. I was a senior pastor for a number of years, so I'm very much familiar with the local church, very passionate about the ministry and the purpose of the local church. Over the last couple of years, I've gravitated more towards the academic world. I have my doctorate degree. I have the privilege of teaching at Prince George's Community College, teaching the philosophy department. So I teach philosophy and ethics and stuff like that. I'm also an adjunct professor at Lancaster Bible College. Lancaster Bible College has an extension campus in Greenbelt, Maryland. And so there I teach philosophy and I also teach preaching. That's my primary role there, is teaching what is called preaching or homiletics.
Okay.
And so we're very privileged that God has given us this opportunity to influence young people in terms of the particular topics or subjects that I teach. And so I'm very much interested in more the intellectual, rational approach to faith.
Sure.
I believe that we need to give people cogent answers to the
Hmm.
questions that they raise. And so we try to do that. And you made mention of the books in my library. I think I've got probably about 7,000
I
volumes in my library, most of which are in the area of philosophy,
yeah.
theology, preaching, stuff like that.
Right. It's not like random books. It's like you
No,
have
no, no.
books.
You won't find books in sociology or
Right.
history in my library. Most
Right.
of my books are either theology
Right.
or philosophy or commentaries. I got a whole bunch of commentaries
Right.
because we are fundamentally a Bible teacher.
Right.
We love the Lord. We approach the world from a Christian worldview, and that's one of the things that our ministry really tries to enhance in people's lives is cultivating a Christian worldview. God has a perspective on
Hmm.
what's going on in our world.
Right.
God has a perspective of what's going on in our individual lives. And often people who claim to be Christian do not have a Christian worldview. And that worldview manifests itself in situations like we're dealing with George
Right.
Floyd's murder and all of the uproar, deservedly so,
Right.
with respect to that. What's the biblical perspective? What is God's view with respect to the murder of this innocent Black man?
That's a good question. I mean that is, I think, what is on the minds of most people. To be perfectly
Right.
honest, you know, what is God's view on it? And even further, what is God's view on America as we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with systemic racism, issues of
Yeah.
systemic racism, and issues of just injustice. Like I think a lot of people are struggling to understand
Yeah.
where is God in this. But I
Well,
know you've got a lot. I know you've got some stuff to say. I'm interested in just listening.
on that question that you mentioned,
Yeah.
let me just say a couple of things fairly
Sure.
quickly. Number one, God is a God of justice. Psalms 89, verse 14 says that righteousness and justice are your throne.
Right.
So God is fundamentally a God of justice and righteousness.
Yes.
I believe what's going on in America is that God is judging America.
Mm.
I think the coronavirus, and I'm not saying that God caused the coronavirus. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I'm saying that the virus is interesting to me that this virus has literally turned our economy, has turned all of the social institutions, our
Right.
medical establishment upside down. What it has revealed is the patent racism and injustice in the medical system,
Yeah.
in the criminal justice system. And this, we knew this, but now white America is seeing the injustices. They're realizing the disproportionality of people affected by coronavirus
Right.
because of poor health systems in urban communities, because of the lack of education in many urban communities, because of the lack of health providers
Right.
in many urban communities. They're seeing systemic racism in the criminal justice system, the disproportionality of Blacks in prison in
Yes.
relationship to the number of the proportion of Blacks in terms of the total population is disproportionate.
Right.
And so I think that there is a kind of judgment
Mm.
that God is bringing upon America and the world in general.
Right.
As it relates to where God is in terms of George Floyd or Rodney King, going way back in the
Right.
day, if you will, God is displeased with racial injustice. God
Absolutely.
is displeased with the lack of empathy and compassion and depraved inhumanity that police officer could have his knee on a man's neck for almost 9 minutes
Right.
with no remorse, no sense of humanity. That's pure evil.
Right.
That's pure evil. We in the African American community know this from Rodney King to Trayvon Martin. I could list a number of these instances. But now white America is seeing, and they're saying, this is wrong.
Right.
What happened to that man was wrong. And so I think the layers like an onion is being peeled back, and they are beginning to see. If you notice the marchers, and I want to say this, I thank God for the young people
Yeah.
who are in the streets, who those who are peacefully and respectfully marching, who are keeping the focus on the injustice. Now the
Right.
looting and all that, that's terrible. But
Yeah.
those young people who are
Not-
focused on what the issue is, I salute them. I commend them. I pray with them. It reminds me of my day when we marched and we protested. And
Right.
so it's good to see that passion. And I just want to say that, let's not be deterred or detracted or dissuaded or distracted by all of the noise around us. We got to keep the main thing the main thing. And
Right.
here's the main thing: there is systemic racism in America. There is definitely a messed up criminal justice system, and we've got to change that. Or I think we're going to have, as the militants in the 1960s used to say, it's going to be one long hot summer.
Right. So I've got a question about
Sure.
us as far as African American, and just in faith. There is a thought process, and especially as the younger African Americans become of age to make their own thoughts and I guess it's always been a thing about Christianity in and of itself being being the white man's religion, or
Right.
the religion that enslaved us.
Right.
And so I guess the conclusion that they will come to is that Christianity isn't Christianity is as evil as the people who have used it in the name of bondage. And so, what is a Christian response to that sort of thinking, where the thinking, in my opinion, is completely understandable. Like it's a valid school of thought, right?
Okay.
In my opinion, it's a valid school of thought. Like like I could understand why if someone slaves you with these words, you would imagine that these words wouldn't be what you would want to look at for spiritual guidance. And as you see more white supremacists continue to, in my opinion, abuse the faith, even in today, they'll continue to abuse the faith. What are we saying to what do especially Christian young people who would mostly watch this? What do Christian young people? How do we combat that school of thought?
I think that's a very good question. What you have to understand is that's not a new question.
Right.
That question was asked 2,000 years ago. That question was asked during the period of slavery, during the period of Reconstruction, during the period of Jim Crowism,
Right.
through the desegregation issues, statutes in the South in the 1950s and 60s. This is a continuing question that African Americans, Negroes, if you go old school,
Right.
had asked for generations.
Right.
Now, it crystallized, particularly in the militancy of the Black Panther movement of the late 1960s, after the assassination of Martin Luther King,
Right.
and the rise of what we call Black nationalism.
Yes.
Black nationalists raised this question: isn't Christianity a white man's religion? Isn't it the religion that enslaved our people? Now, let's respond. We could take a whole program just dealing with that question, but I want to
Right.
address that question. Number one, is Christianity a white man's religion? First of all, show me anywhere in the Bible where it says that this book is only for white people.
Right.
Secondly, the construction of Christianity is such that you cannot do. Now, I'm a theologian in many respects.
Right.
You cannot Christian theology. You cannot talk about the doctrine of God, the Trinity. You cannot talk about the communion. You cannot talk about the ecclesia of the church. These
Right.
are core concepts within Christianity without talking about a man by the name of Saint Augustine.
Right.
By the way, Saint Augustine was a black man,
Mm.
and he is the author and the progenitor of many of the major doctrines, with particularly within Roman Catholicism and
Right.
even Protestantism. So let me back up and say this. Christianity is not a white man's religion. It was used by white slave owners. It was used by white oppressors
Right.
to subjugate our people, taking scriptural verses out of context without proper hermeneutics and exegesis. And many of the whites who use these improper tools wouldn't even be able to spell it or understand it itself. But you cannot take a verse out of context to make it say whatever you want it to say.
Right.
The Bible does not endorse slavery, but the Bible does not shy away from slavery.
Right.
The Bible doesn't say that slavery is good, but the Bible does say that we have a God and a Savior who wants to redeem us. And we have to understand that slavery in antiquity is not the same thing as slavery in the Western United States.
Mm.
In antiquity, one was enslaved if you went into debt. So, for example, Shawn, if I was in debt to you, the way that I paid my debt, that is in the ancient world,
Right.
I would indenture myself to you as a servant for a specific period of time to pay off my debt.
Right.
Now, what happened was, because it was much easier to identify the African became a permanent slave because they were much easier to identify. If you were Caucasian, you could mingle into the broader community. And so even though you were indebted, you could mingle in and you would not be distinguished. But if you are an African, obviously your hue is such that you become instantly recognizable. So it became easier to enslave our people. And to continue that enslavement, they used false verses, that is, verses taken out of context,
Right.
to say that the Bible supports and substantiates and even endorses slavery, which it does not. So back up for a minute. Is the Bible a white man's religion? No. The Bible is about a God who brings universal salvation through Jesus Christ. The
Right.
Bible is about repentance. The Bible is about being made right with God. Ultimately, what the Bible does is show us our broken humanity and how Christ has redeemed us from that brokenness.
Right.
Now, can that be abused? It certainly has. Can
Right.
you give any? The clothes that you wear are clothes that maybe a white person made.
Right.
Does that mean that the clothes are bad in and of themselves? Or does that mean that the vehicle through which those clothes were made may be evil or malicious or whatever? The
Right.
car that you drive was maybe made by a white person, but does that mean that the car itself is evil? So Christianity has gotten a bad rap, particularly among Black nationalists, in this outrageous and felonious argument that it's a white man's religion. It is not. Last point. Last point. For those of you who really want to pursue this subject, let me
Right.
give you an excellent book that helped me many, many years ago. It's written by the late, great radical preacher Tom Skinner. Those we may have forgotten about Tom Skinner, but many of these issues Tom Skinner addressed in the late 1970s. And he wrote a book, a little small book called How Black is the Gospel? How Black is the Gospel? If you can get a copy of that book, it'll change your life. Because what Tom Skinner had to address is what many of us who have come into a kind of enlightenment had to address,
Right.
is indeed Christianity a white man's religion? And what Tom realized is that I do not have to give up my blackness in order to be Christian, because Christianity does not require me to be black or white. Christianity is racial.
Right.
It's whosoever will
Yes.
come. It
Yes.
has to do with the fact that we have a broken relationship with God, and that God sent Jesus to redeem us from that brokenness. And one last thing, I keep saying one last thing, but this
It's
is
all
one
good.
last
It's good. It's
The
good
fact
right
of the
now.
matter is, any notion of Christianity as white man's religion is fallacious, because Jesus comes from the Middle East. And
Right.
guess what? Middle Eastern people are not of white hue. They are of a darker, more olive hue. So we could say In one sense, I won't go this far, but I've got many colleagues who I agree with who would say that Jesus was black
Right.
or a person of color.
Right.
And
Right.
so the notion of Jesus as a white, blonde haired, blue eyed, European white dude is fallacious.
Right.
So I hope that finally we can put to bed the notion of Christianity as a white man's religion. It is not. One of the greatest theologians in the Christian community was a man by the name of Saint Augustine. He wrote the Confessions of Saint Augustine. He wrote the Cities of God. He wrote the Enchiridion of Faith, Hope, and Love. And he was a person of color. And the Roman Catholic Church regards Saint Augustine as the doctor of theology. So our Christian understanding of doctrine comes from a black man or a man of color, to be honest. And the idea that I have to become white in order to become Christian is just totally nonsense. It's so
Right.
laughable that I can't believe that that argument still persists.
Man, it persists and it
one
persists
last thing, I
loud.
keep saying one last thing.
It's all good.
I wrote a book some years ago called How Black Presence in the Bible.
Right.
If you do a study in the Bible, you will see a lot of talk about the Ethiopians,
Right.
the Libyans.
Right.
You will see a lot of talk about black people. They are in the Bible. Go to Genesis chapter 10, for example. Ham, Nimrod. So there's so many people of color. Color was not an issue in the ancient world.
Right.
It was economics.
Yes.
And so the notion of Christianity as white man religion is so laughable
Right.
that I'm amazed that it has any intellectual momentum whatsoever.
Let me ask you this, because I want to ask I want to ask questions to you that young people find hard.
Sure.
Most African American, especially young people, but in general, African Americans do not believe that the leader of this country, they do not believe in the leader of this country. And they have, and if you go different places, it's always about pray for your leaders. And then I think that you find yourself at a place where you can't really do that, because it's you get to a point of especially when you're younger, you get to a point of just hatred.
Yeah.
How do you guide? How could you guide people through that, knowing that just knowing that while I would have to call millions of people marching around the world in Black Lives Matter, he'll put the concentration on the exception and not the actual, and not an actual thing going on. So he won't at all mention the Black Lives Matter, the movement, systemic racism, anything that a lot of other people are beginning to mention. He'll start talking about the rioters or the looters, and the truth is that is a very, very minute part of what's going on in reality. And the more and more he does it, like, the tear gas on an innocent group of people so he could get to a church to wave the, like all of those things that went on, you find that people are very, very unforgiving. What is a realistic way to bring those people? What is the Christian thing right now? Like, let me say that. Let me say it that way. Yeah. What?
Couple of comments. Number one, this president is a narcissistic, homophobic racist, period. I have little or no respect for the man, period. I have great respect for the office. I am commanded by scripture to pray for those in authority. And so it becomes problematic when you have a president that personally he's a narcissistic egomaniac, if I could be that blunt. And I'm not a political guy. So for me personally to make these kind of comments is out of character, but I have to
Right.
call it as I see it.
Right.
And so now the biblical admonition, and I'm challenged by that, is to pray for those in authority,
Right.
pray for the leaders. Romans 13, 1 Peter 3 speaks to this kind of issue. I would say this: as a Christian, I have to first of all cultivate a biblical worldview.
Mm-hmm.
The biblical worldview is what governs and guides my life. For example, as a married man, I'm commanded to love my wife. But
Mm-hmm.
what if I don't feel like it?
Right.
What if she, quote, don't deserve it?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a choice to make. Do I lean on my own understanding, Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6,
Right.
or do I trust in the Lord? What I'm saying to you as young people, if you have a Christian worldview, even though these issues are challenging and they're hard to do, we are still commanded to obey the laws of the land. We're still commanded to love our enemies. What distinguishes you as a Christian from those who are not a Christian? Not that it's convenient, not that you feel like it. Then I think if your Christianity is what I feel like, then it's not real Christianity.
Right.
Real Christianity costs something.
Mm-hmm.
It costs me to love my wife.
Right.
It costs me to pray for this particular president, even though in my heart I don't really want to.
Right.
But am I governed? Watch this, Sean. Am I governed by what I want, or am I governed by a higher authority?
Yes.
And so the issue becomes obedience or submission. Now, I'm not saying that we need to send him Christmas cards and things like that, but I am saying that I am commanded by my Lord to pray for those in authority.
Mm.
And when they transgress against biblical principles, I'm commanded to obey God rather than man.
Mm.
So my point to those watching this is simply this: if you have a biblical worldview, these are challenging days and challenging things to do, but you are not governed by the worldly perspective. You're not governed by that. You're governed by the kingdom of God, by the principles of God. And so as a husband, I have to love my wife. As a wife, she has to submit to her husband. I'm commanded to obey the laws of the land. I'm commanded to pray for my brothers and sisters. I'm commanded to love my enemies and all of that. And these are things that are not easy to do. That is what distinguishes the Christian from the non-Christian. Let me give you an example. If you've ever been to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, you've ever been up to that Dutch area up
Right.
there in the western part of Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
it is very clear that these people are different than the rest of us.
Right.
And I use that as an example. How do we determine their distinction? We determine their distinction by how they talk, how they dress, and how they govern their lives. We may not agree with them, we may not even like them, but here's the thing: they are different than what we are.
Right.
And it's very distinguishable. So what distinguishes me from a Christian? Man looks at me and he sees me respecting my wife, loving my wife, treating my wife good, and so forth. And he says, well, how can you do that? Well, my Lord tells me to do this.
Right.
And so it's not an easy thing to do. I'm not trying to make this pie in the sky. It's not an easy thing to do, but you have to either be governed by the principles of the kingdom of God or the principles of the world. And too many Christians are not cultivating a biblical worldview, a kingdom perspective. They're locked into their emotions. They're locked into what the world around them tells them they ought to feel, think, and do.
Right.
Notice what I said. What the world around them tells them what they ought to feel, think, and do. We ought to protest. We ought to make our voices heard, but we also ought to keep in mind the principles of the kingdom of God. So I pray for the county executive. I pray for the governor. I pray for the mayor of the District of Columbia.
Right.
I pray for the governor of Virginia. I even pray for this president.
Right. What? You answer hard questions really, really easy. I'm trying to think of a harder one.
Well, Sean, because of my experience with students at the community college and so forth, in my classes, I get asked not this kind of questions, but I get asked tough questions all the time.
Yeah.
And so in order for my gift and my service to be manifested, you got to study and prepare, and you got to, understand the question, articulate the question, and then give a response to the question.
Yeah.
So I'm very comfortable with addressing what they call the tough questions.
Yeah. What do you feel like through this whole? Ooh, I've got two questions. The first one, what do you feel like through this whole? Let's talk about injustice first. No, let's not talk about injustice first. What was it when the pandemic happened? When the pandemic happened, there was a sort of a split understanding from where the church should stand, and so there was the follow the laws of the land, and then there was the you're stomping on my First Amendment
Yeah.
right to assembly. Was there a correct response to that? Like, were the churches who had church was it a correct response? Because the churches who decided to have church anyway would criticize the churches who didn't have church or went completely online, and the churches who went completely online would criticize the ones who continued to have church as it's not safe for your people and you're not covering. And what was the correct, maybe let's say, or what's your opinion about the church's response in the times of pandemic?
I think that's a good question. I've got a couple of comments to make on that. Number one, the authority, the state said that there is a serious disease serious virus that's affecting millions of people. We are already over 100,000 deaths.
Yeah.
I want that to sink in. 3 months ago, these people were alive.
Yes.
Early March, these people were still alive.
Yeah.
We're in June now. They're dead.
Yeah.
100,000 worldwide. I think we're around the million, almost a million worldwide. So here's the first point. This is real.
Right.
This is real. Second point. Should churches continue to have service? And here's the argument that these churches would make. Well, then we're going to have faith. We're not going to operate in fear and stuff like that. Here's my response. The Bible says the devil tempted Jesus and said, look, if you're the Son of God, this is Matthew 4, I want you to turn this rock into bread. I want you to walk off the cliff. Jesus says, you shall not tempt the Lord your God.
Right.
What Jesus is saying is this. There are certain natural laws that are real, and we have to be cognizant of those natural laws. So my response is this. If the state said you couldn't pray, you couldn't read the Bible, you couldn't have religious services, then we need to react to that by saying, no, you can't do that. One, we've got constitutional rights. Number two, God commands his people to pray and read the Bible and stuff like that. If the state said you couldn't do that, then we got a problem from my perspective.
Got you.
The state didn't say that.
Right.
What the state said is this. Hey, guys, we got a thing that's really killing people, and you have technology through Zoom and all the social media stuff that you guys are so adept at that you can still have a kind of a service. You can still get the word out. You can still have your sermons and stuff like that. You can do all of those things, and we'll even help you with it, but we're just trying to keep the populace safe.
Right.
So you may be cool, but if you get infected by somebody else, then you go to your parents, you go to somebody who has a pre-existing condition. This is a problem.
Right.
So I thought the governor was spot on. I don't always agree with the decisions of the governor, but I think in this instance, he was thinking about the greater good.
Right.
He did not tell churches that they couldn't have religious programming. He just said, look, I'm going to encourage you not to gather because of this virus remember that the whole curve instances,
right.
The curve was ascending. It wasn't descending, it was ascending. And so my response is those ministers, and I want to be very clear on this, those ministers who endeavor to invoke my constitutional rights, my right to religious freedom are fools. Fools. Why? Because they're fighting the wrong battle. It's a misplaced argument. here is what they ought to be concerned with. I've got, whether I got a church of 50 or 500 or 5,000, what's best for the people?
Yeah.
As a leader, sometimes I've got to make unpopular decisions because it's in the best or greatest good for the greatest number of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a pastor, what we said was, we're not going to have service. I mean, we're not going to physically gather in a building. We're
Right.
going to use Zoom. We do Zooms, live stream, all that kind of stuff. All this is beyond my skill set, by the way. But we're using all of the social media stuff. And guess what? We are reaching people beyond what we normally would have reached. Our income has increased. We're
Right.
getting people from Georgia, New York, California.
Right.
Got one brother in Asia, I think it was Thailand, someplace like that, that was watching our program. So what? Guess what? The ministry is still going on.
Ministry is still going forth. Yeah.
And guess what? We are concerned about the health of our people, particularly our elderly. And so we won't gather probably until the end of this month, maybe the 1st of August,
Right.
until really everything is like crystal clear.
Right.
And then, of course, we're taking all the precautions. We got more hand sanitizer than I think is legal. We got gloves, we got masks, we got thermometers, we got all kinds of stuff. So when we do gather, we're going to have social distancing in the service. Everybody's going to be checked in terms of the temperature. Everybody's going to have a mask on. Everybody's going to have hand sanitizer.
Right.
Because this virus is not killing, this virus is killing disproportionately African Americans, the elderly, and over 100,000 people who were alive in January
Right.
are dead now.
Right.
So as a pastor, am I more concerned about the offering or trying to make some political statement, or am I concerned about my people?
Right.
Not my people, but the people.
Right. Okay. Now, so my second part of that question goes to all of the unrest that is happening. As far as all the marches, all of the, all of that happening in the country. What is the response? Because I haven't heard very much response from the church.
Mm-hmm.
What should the church be doing? What should the church be doing in this? Now, I've heard some responses from. Let me rephrase that question. What should the black church be doing in this? Because I've heard some responses from the white from the white community. If I've heard some responses from them, but all of those responses are more so of explanation as to why we're doing this. The black church should have a completely different position, I think, because of there is an experience, and then there is a, you know what I'm saying? Like, the one church has been through it, and the other church is looking into it. What should be the church's response to all of the things that, as far as like, what should the church be doing?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, or a number of things, I should say, that I think the church, African American church, I'm going to broaden this and say the church as a whole.
Okay.
Because this virus does not distinguish between black and white. This unrest is about social injustice.
Mm-hmm.
It's about systemic racism. And we need our white counterparts to help make change in America.
Right.
Sidebar, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I believe it was,
Yes.
would not have been passed if it wasn't for white men and women who had the conviction that social injustice in the 60s was wrong.
Right.
So we need our white counterparts to partner with us as we fight for social justice and racial equality. Now, what should the church be doing in relationship to the issues that we're confronted with? First of all, the church has to clearly identify what those issues are.
Right.
The church has to be aware that this is not about being spiteful or mean-spirited, but this is about systemic injustice directed towards a particular group of people, particularly African-American males.
Right.
And so the church needs to be cognizant of what the issue is. See, I take this in light of what Colin Kaepernick, about 5 years ago, the football player for the San Francisco 49ers, when he kneeled down because of this very issue 5 years
Right.
ago.
Right.
And what happened was, and this is the point that I want you to see, is that narrative got twisted to he's anti-American, he's anti-flag, he's
Right.
anti-military. That
Right.
wasn't the case at all. So
Right.
my point is that we have to be careful that the narrative is not co-opted.
Mm-hmm.
What is the narrative? That there is social injustice, systemic racism, and we have to put an end to it once and for all.
Right.
We need to so we need legislation, we
Yes.
need mayors, we need President Obama was very right the other day when he mentioned that we need mayors to look at their police force,
Right.
the police chiefs need to look at police tactics.
Yes.
I don't understand why it takes 10 cops to bring one guy down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand when a guy says, look, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. When a grown man cries out for his mama,
Mm-hmm.
our humanity needs to kick in, or
Right.
training or something needs to say, okay, this guy poses no threat. Why are you still with your knee on his neck?
Right.
And so we need to be very clear and articulate what the narrative is. The narrative is this: there is obviously racial profiling, systemic injustice,
Mm-hmm.
an inadequate ability of police force to de-escalate as opposed to escalate situations.
Right.
And there's a tendency or a proclivity for white people to think that just because a black man is in the community or in the area, that somehow they pose a threat.
Right.
That's white privilege. And so we got to be clear that we want to crystallize the narrative to be this, so that we can get legislation and get people more aware of it. I think that's one of the first things we need to do. Secondly, and this is often something that people may kind of poo-poo or say, well, what use is that? I think we need to pray. I think we need to pray. The book of Second Chronicles talks about, if my people will humble themselves and pray, and I will heal their land. We need to pray. We need to ask God to lift his hand of judgment, and that there is a sense of reconciliation and a sense of community. Because one thing that the coronavirus has said to all of us, we in this together.
Right.
Because the coronavirus says, I don't care if you black, white, or Asian, pink, polka dot, or blue.
Right.
I'm going to affect you if you expose yourself. And so we have had to learn that, guess what? As a human community, we're part of that community.
Right.
And so I think we need to make sure the narrative is clear, that is not co-opted by other things. I think we need to pray. And I think thirdly, you mentioned it very, very astutely. We need to not listen to the noise coming from this president.
Right.
Here's the thing. This president does not have the capacity to nuance an argument.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he reads. I don't know if he's got the mental acumen to wonder and look through issues, but he does not have the nuance ability. When I say nuance, the ability to look at the specifics of a particular issue.
Right.
It's like a chapter. He sees the whole book, but he doesn't see the individual chapters.
Right.
So for him, what he saw was looting. For us, we saw peaceful protesters. For him, what he saw is property being damaged. For us, we're looking at a man who was literally executed in front of us in broad daylight, and 4 cops who were supposed to protect and serve just watching as this nonsense was going on.
With witnesses.
Where is
Know when the camera was on.
where is the president's capacity to say, I abhor the looting, but the issue is something I stand with? I appreciate the governor of New York, Mayor Cuomo.
Yeah.
He said, look, the issue is not about the looters, as abhorrent as that is. The issue is that a black man was murdered once again. He said, here we go again. We could talk about Rodney King going back to 1991, or Trayvon Martin in 2012, or Eric Gardner in July of 2014, or Freddie Gray in Baltimore a few years ago, or Michael Brown and the whole Ferguson thing. Here we go again. Why can't this president nuance the arguments that's being made and say, look, We need to stop the violence and all of that. But the issue is this: he doesn't have that capacity. So
Right.
he'd rather talk about looters. He'd rather talk about property damage. He'd rather talk about I'm going to send the military in because he's incompassionate. He doesn't have the capacity to be a comfort. What we need is a comforter in chief.
Right.
He knows the commander in chief role, but can he be comforter in chief?
Right.
Could you imagine how Barack Obama, for example, would have handled this?
Right.
I believe Barack Obama would have been conciliatory, would have been pastoral, if you will. And that's what America needs. America needs a pastor to say to them, okay, we're going to get through this. This is wrong. These are the steps that we're going to take to
Right.
correct this. We need a pastor. We don't need more, kind of might is right. And I'm going to take the military into the streets, which he doesn't have the constitutional right to do so.
Right.
I'm
Of
going to do
course.
that is not
Threats.
what we need.
Yeah.
But this guy does not have the capacity to see what his other role is other
Absolutely
than
not.
the commander in chief.
Absolutely not. What? In a more I want to say lighter, but it's not really lighter. When talking about racism, a lot of things that happened last week. One of the things is the showing. It was a couple of things that happened, and of course, the big thing that happened was George Floyd, and that was the big thing that happened. But the sort of smaller, nuanced things that happened, the things like the thing like Amy, what was her name? It's Connor, Amy, whatever her name was, in New York, who
Yeah.
called the police on a guy and just
Yeah.
told out flat out lies. It's another lady in Florida who called the police and said these two men kidnapped my son, and these two black men, kidnapped my son in real life. She killed him. And it was another guy in Georgia, was it, that said that black men carjacked him and locked him in a hotel room, and the truth was he was actually soliciting prostitution there, but he was trying to cover up his youth pastor status. How do that is, I think those type of things is what leads to the spirit of, like, it's always been, if you blame it on a black man, you can pretty much get away with it. How does the culture, or how do we begin to address that? Because it's almost like, and I said it this way, and I think it was harsh, but it's almost like, as much as white people can say, "Oh my God, this systemic racism thing happened," is as if it's something new. It's like, not really. You knew it was happening before, because you knew all you had to do was say a black man did it, and you could get out of whatever sin you were in. How do we back away from that? How do we begin to heal from that? Because that, to me, is the depth of why we get things like a Michael Brown, or why we get things like the disrespect from a police level, is because everybody know, and it's been like this forever, but everybody know. So it's like, y'all can pretend like you don't know about systemic racism, but in the back of your mind, you know that, I'm a white woman, I can just call and say it's a black man, and you're done. You know what I'm saying? How do you get past? How could we get past that?
That's a very difficult and challenging point or statement, because you're really looking at the human heart. I'm going to make a couple of comments. I think essentially this is a question of what is called white privilege. I think there's an underlying assumption that what's white is right. And obviously, if a white person is notifying the police against an African American, then the white person is de facto proven or is assumed correct.
Right.
The assumption is that the white person is correct and the black person is in the wrong. And often that comes out of white privilege. And white privilege stems from the fact that a lot of white people assume that they are superior. They may not say it as bluntly as I've said it,
Right.
but there's a lot of whites that feel that they are superior.
Right.
And the problem with that is that often blacks have brought into the superiority, so-called superiority of white people, and
Mm-hmm.
we act in such ways that belie our own genius and our own intellect.
Mm-hmm.
Often white people don't understand aspects of black culture. They love our music, they love our artistic capability. All you have to do is look at hip hop music. Go
Mm-hmm.
back 30 years ago, hip hop music was despised,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in
Absolutely.
suburban communities. And you would know more about this than I would, but look at hip hop music now. It is the norm.
Right.
And it's probably, and I may be corrected here, but I understand more white kids buy hip hop music than black kids.
Right. Absolutely.
So what happened is that whites have selected certain aspects of black culture that they admire
Mm-hmm.
and that they appreciate.
That's right.
Other aspects of that culture, that is black intellectualism, the fact that black people may have an opinion, that we think differently, we act differently based on our past experiences than whites. And because we are different in many respects, not all respects, but in many respects, particularly culturally, we're different. And it is just assumed that white culture, quote unquote, is just superior.
Right.
And white people, though they may despise injustice, and maybe even despise racism, they don't understand how they benefit from the system because they're given the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
They're given the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Whereas as an African American male, I am not given the benefit. I am guilty until proven innocent. Whereas I
Absolutely.
should be innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
So I think that number one, this is a hard issue that we have to get to the heart of America, and political programs are not going to address the hard issue.
Right.
The issue that we have to address is spiritual. I have to keep coming back to
Mm-hmm.
the issues that we're confronting have to be spiritual, and we have to deal with them spiritually. That's why the church is so critical, that we've got to change the hearts of people. I need my white colleagues in the pastoral ministry to start talking to the people about justice
Mm-hmm.
and
Absolutely.
mercy and compassion
Absolutely.
and issues of racial inequalities.
Right.
And they need to bring a conscious awareness to white people that they have been given the benefit of the doubt because they're white.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. There were upon coming here, there were some things that you had on your heart to say.
Right.
And I want to give you that platform right now because we're at 50 minutes and I could ask you 100 more questions.
Wow. We're already at 50
Because
minutes.
I mean,
My
like,
goodness.
and I you know, I'm amongst the intellectual Christian, want to get into the depths. So these type of conversations are just
Cool.
Cool. Little tentacles for me.
Again, I enjoy the conversation.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do, and I appreciate, again, I respect what you're doing, appreciate what you're doing, and continue. I'll be praying for you more regularly, that you would be successful. That this platform, you guys use the word blow up. I'm praying that this platform really blows up. I will use the word expand and grow. that would happen for this platform. And thank you for this
sir.
opportunity. What I just simply wanted to say is this. I was incensed and enraged, like so many, when I witnessed George Floyd literally be murdered during broad daylight with 4 cops just watching this. I was numb. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so I had to think about this. And I think that the term that I want to use, and I want you all to get this term, depraved indifference toward another human being is senseless. Depraved indifference towards another human being is just senseless. And what we saw was depraved indifference. That man was not human. That man was the epitome of evil. And what he did was, before all of us, was say, I can kill this black man, ain't nothing gonna happen to me. Because he could look at what happened to Rodney King. Now I'm gonna go old school. Back in March of 1991, I'll never forget it. We all witnessed the video of 5 or 6 LA police cops literally wailing away at this black guy who was defenseless. They were wailing away, and they were all acquitted. Trayvon Martin, that didn't involve a police person, but another young black guy killed. Freddie Gray and he was, the Baltimore City police officers had him. He was not a threat, and yet he died. And then, of course, Michael Brown in Ferguson, police officer shoots him dead, unarmed, shoots him dead. Or I could think of Eric Gardner, New York guy. 4 or 5 cops wrestled him down to the ground, and he started saying, I can't breathe, and he died.
Breathe.
So here's the point. This officer obviously assumed that he could get away with this, because look at the other cases that I've enumerated, and I've only mentioned a few of them. There are many, many more.
Right.
That nothing was done to the police, and this is something that has to stop. It just has to stop. We have to talk to police officers, mayors, and people, police chiefs and captains and all sheriffs and people like that. How are you training people? How are you training them? Why is it that the first response, particularly to a black person, is I'm going to pull my gun out and then I'll ask questions later? Whatever happened to de-escalation? Whatever happened to the person is no threat to you? That is, the person poses no threat. Why do you have to kill the person? That's because with depraved indifference, you don't value that life as you value others. What if that was your son? What if that was your father? And so what I want to simply say is that enough's enough. And we've got to get to the place where this becomes a thing of the past. And we won't get there until we raise our voices. We won't get there until we make it very clear that we're not going away quietly in the night. This is not going to just dissipate as other situations have, but we're going to continue to press and press and press and protest and speak out until change occurs. Specific legislative change occur. That is with this Congress or without this Congress. That is with this president or without this president. Legislative change must occur. And it begins in the hearts of people who recognize the humanity of other individuals. And let me also say, this is not to say that we're passive against crime, that we're passive against lawbreakers. The looters need to be arrested. The looters need to be put in prison. But what we are saying is not every young black man is looting. Not every young black man poses a threat.
Right.
We are human. We breathe. We bleed like everybody else. And so what I wanted to simply say is this. I'm tired of all the noise. I'm tired of making all the sounds. I want action. I want concrete action. I want a plan. I think that plan involves the churches. I think that plan involves prayer. I think that plan involves talking to mayors and county executives and governors and police chiefs and sheriffs all over this land saying, stop it. You can stop it by retraining your officers. And if they're bad cops, and guess what? In any profession, there's some bad apples.
Right.
In my profession, as a preacher, as a pastor, there's some bad preachers. In the legal profession, they're bad lawyers. They're bad apples everywhere. But when you find a bad apple, you need to root them out. Why was that guy who already had a history of violence? I'm talking about the police officer now.
Right.
From what I understood, he had a history of violence, aggressive behavior. Why is he still on the police force? Why is he still in a position to hurt other people, particularly black males? So I'm saying that police chiefs and sheriffs need to look at who they have hired, their psychological makeup, and if you got bad apples, you need to root them out. That's what I wanted to say.
I've got, I definitely, there are some other there are some other conversations in the future I know I want to bring you back on for.
Let's do it, man. Look, I can't believe we've been talking almost an hour. Unbelievable.
Man,
Let's do it.
because
Let's do it. I'll be
it's
glad to.
it definitely got to get your perspective. You know, when we come out of this, it's about hopefully we can have a conversation about living, about how we should be living versus conversation about the craziness going on in the world. It's, you know.
I wrote a book called Living Life Well, so that'd be great.
Yeah. So that's awesome, man. Thank you very much for coming on, and I'm definitely I'm definitely ready, to put you on some other stuff. That's awesome. Thank you so much, and we will do this again soon.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you, Shawn. Hey, be safe, brother.
You too, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.